You found it. It's the real news with your host, David Knight.
Welcome back. I'm David Knight, and we're going to be talking to an Emmy Award-winning medical producer. He produced one of the most controversial films, documentary films that's come out in decades, and that is Vaxxed. Remember that? How all the controversies around that as it got accepted into the Tribeca Film Festival and then kicked out because filmmakers didn't want people discussing this issue. I mean, the people who are supposed to worship freedom of speech, the fellow filmmakers said, we don't want this here. And even though Robert De Niro has said that he believes that his child was damaged by a vaccine, and even though he had accepted them into the film festival, he bowed to the pressure of filmmakers and took Vaxxed out. Now, we got an article here from Jeffrey Jackson. Jeffrey Jackson, that's JAXEN.com. Very interesting article talking about Mr. Bigtree, and this is the person I'm talking about here, the Emmy Award-winning medical producer who produced Vaxxed. He's joining us now. Del Bigtree has an organization that is called the Informed Consent Action Network. And as Jeffrey Jackson's article pointed out, the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services has been served legal notice on vaccine safety oversight failure. So we wanted to talk to Mr. Bigtree, get him to break down the lies and deception that are the basis of him putting together a legal notice and how this all works, because many people don't understand anything or know anything about the 1986 National Childhood Vaccine Injury Act of 1986. This was the thing that was set up to not protect children, not to protect our health, but to protect the vaccine industry. So joining us now is Del Bigtree. You can find him on Twitter at Del Bigtree, and that is DelBigtree. Thank you so much for joining us, Mr. Bigtree.
David, it's a pleasure to be with you. Thanks for having me.
So tell us a little bit, first of all, about give us an overview of what's going on. You've got some statistics that you sent me saying that there's 59,000 injuries from vaccines reported last year, 432 deaths. What's going on? How does the HHS fit into this?
Well, as you pointed out, the pharmaceutical industry has no liability when it comes to vaccines. That was taken away in the 1986 Compensation Act. Essentially, the pharmaceutical industry blackmailed Ronald Reagan and said, if you don't protect us from liability, we're paying too much in lawsuits, then we're going to stop making vaccines. And so he reticently signed this bill and took away all liability. So the liability now sits on our health department, which is Health and Human Services, which oversees CDC, FDA, HRSA, and NIH. And essentially what we're pointing out is that no vaccine safety studies are being done. Since the pharmaceutical industry doesn't have to do it, they can't be sued. There's no reason for them to be doing safety studies. It's on Health and Human Services, and they're not doing it either. And so we put a notice forward with legal backing saying, if you do not prove that you are starting to do the vaccine safety science that we expect, everybody expects vaccine safety science is just like drug science, which is it goes through double-blind safety experiments, that we get to see, saline placebos against the drug itself. That is not happening in vaccines. For instance, a hepatitis B vaccine that's given to a day-one-old baby only gets 4 days of safety studies before it was put on the market, compared to Grandpa's Viagra, which got 10 years. And that safety study for the hepatitis B never had a placebo group it looked at. It essentially just said, oh, there was some swelling in the arm. So think about that. If on day 6 the baby died, that didn't make it into the study. The death was not caused by hepatitis B. If the child develops multiple sclerosis 2 years later, that wasn't caused by the vaccine, because we never looked. And so those are ultimately issues.
Yeah, they just blame it on sudden infant death syndrome or something like that. It was just mysterious. We don't know what happened. It was just sudden,
Exactly right. Just this random occurrence, just spontaneously died. Kids don't spontaneously die. So as you pointed out, we have a VAERS system. That's a Vaccine Adverse Events Reporting System. This is our national system that we report vaccine injuries. Well, there was 59,000 reports last year. But the problem is Health and Human Services points out themselves, even though this is their system, that since it's a passive reporting system, doctors are not really using it, that it really only represents less than 1% of the total injuries. So that means we could have had 5.9 million people injured by vaccines. In that 59,000 was 432 reported deaths. Well, if that's only 1%, does that mean we're at 43,000 deaths happening from vaccines? None of this. No one knows about this. They think vaccines are safe. They keep being told by Sanjay Gupta and people on television, oh, we've looked at vaccines. They're perfectly safe. The science is settled. That is absolutely not true. I've been investigating this for 3 years. I think this is the biggest government cover-up really in the history of my lifetime, and certainly when it comes to medical science. The scientific method is not being used. Everybody's sticking their head in the ground, and children are dying, children being maimed and injured every single year. It's a known fact, and nobody seems to want to go near it. So we are pressing a legal case against HHS. If they do not come back to us and say, we're going to get our act together and do the job that America expects us to do, then they can expect legal action from us.
Wow, that's very important. That's amazing. And when we go back, you're talking about the lies and the deception. And I think it's important for people to understand, as you point out, they basically blackmailed President Reagan back in 1986, and we're going to completely stop making vaccines unless you give us total immunity. And this is something that is bigger than big pharma. These people, because when they have to test a drug, as you point out with Viagra or whatever, they go through an extensive testing period. But they don't have to do any testing for this because these people don't have any legal immunity. They've got legal immunity. They can't be sued. And I think that's a key part of it, too, when we talk about the deception, and that is the court that it created. Most people don't even know that such a court exists. So they don't know that other people are getting injured. They're told, as you point out, by mainstream media, oh, they're perfectly safe. We've examined this. There's nothing to see here. Move along. And yet there are people who do get compensated from this court, but most people don't even know that it exists.
That's right. And this court isn't like a normal court that we see. There is no jury. Press isn't allowed in there. There's no precedence. You can't refer to other cases that have won. There's no discovery. You can't get any of the internal documents that we saw that were used to determine whether the vaccine was safe by the manufacturer. So if you look at something like Vioxx, that we all watched the court case around Vioxx, it killed over 50,000 people. Some people say that number could be as high as 500,000. And Merck, in the court case against them, internal emails came out that showed that they were saying that any doctor that questions the safety of Vioxx, we will hunt them down and destroy them where they live. That came out in the court case. That's why you need discovery. But when someone goes to fight a vaccine injury, they get none of that. You can't see the internal emails. You can't look at their studies. And so it's a totally corrupted system. And what people don't realize is, think of the insanity of this. When you think of a conflict of interest, Health and Human Services is responsible to do vaccine safety science. But guess who is the defendant when you sue when your child is injured by a vaccine or is killed by a vaccine? The defendant in this court system is Health and Human Services itself. You are literally fighting the government of the United States. They use
this
Department
is amazing
of Justice.
News. Del, we got to take a quick break. If you want to get more information, again, you can go to icandecide.com. You can also find him on Twitter at Del Bigtree. We'll be right back. I'm David Knight. We're talking to Del Bigtree. This is very important news. We'll be right back. Welcome back. I'm David Knight, and we're talking to someone who is exposing one of the biggest lies that affects each and every one of us. And that, of course, is the vaccine lie. He's been talking about the history of how this all came to be. 1986, we had the Vaccine Act that was put into place that created the Vaccine Court, as it's popularly called. But it's not a real court. It's a kangaroo court. And we had him breaking down what happens in the Vaccine Court, how there is no discovery because they don't want anybody to know. Not only do they not want you to know what's going on in the vaccine industry, they don't want you to know that this court even exists. So they shut that down. They worked very hard to suppress any information about it. Now, the man we're talking to right now is Del Bigtree. He was a producer of Vaxxed. You remember the controversy around that when they removed it from the Tribeca Film Festival. We've talked earlier about An Open Secret, another film that was suppressed. We had Gabe Hoffman in a week or two ago. That was about pedophiles in Hollywood and just pedophiles in general. Of course, they always shut down any films that expose the truth about things. And now that is starting to come out. But you need to understand that as bad as the pedophile issue is here, it's very difficult to know what's going on with vaccines. This is something that operates on people's ignorance and on government mandates. And that's the thing that we have to be concerned about, as these people have so much power that they can force the president to take away all their liability and to create this secret star chamber court, or I guess we could call it a kangaroo court. The thing is a total travesty, and they operate on your ignorance. And that's why it's so important for you to see the documentary Vaxxed. But Del Bigtree has not stopped by producing a documentary. He also has a website, ICanDecide.com, ICanDecide.com, because we've got to stop the lies, we've got to stop the deception, we've got to stop the mandates. And so he has ICanDecide.com, and we want to talk to him about what he is doing to take the issue to Health and Human Services. They are the epitome of regulatory capture. We talk about so many times how the bureaucracies that are set up to be watchdogs over particular industries wind up being captured by those industries and used to help them. And I've never seen a worse case of regulatory capture than the situation of Health and Human Services. As Del was pointing out, if you sue this secret vaccine court, the defendant is Health and Human Services. That tells you a lot, doesn't it? It tells you that they are defending, not overseeing the vaccine court. So joining us is Del Bigtree. You can find him on Twitter at Del Bigtree, DELBIGTREE. Thank you so much for exposing this, Mr. Bigtree. Let's talk a little bit about some of the points that you have on the letter that you are, the legal notice that you have sent to the Department of Health and Human Services, and break down some of the questions that you confront them with, and the action items that you have in this legal demand.
Well, so there's about 11 real questions or issues that we have that involve corruption, conflicts of interest. For instance, as I was saying, one of the major conflicts of interest is the fact that HHS has to defend the vaccine program in court. If you're injured, they're also the ones doing the safety science. If you're going to win in court, you have to use HHS's safety science to prove that your child has been injured. Well, think about that. That's like being in a murder investigation where the murderer is the one doing all the forensics. It's totally impossible to win, and they won't do the science because it'll be used against them in court. We want that changed. We want vaccine safety taken out of HHS, that they have too big a conflict of interest. We've done this with the National Transportation Safety Board. We did it with the nuclear regulatory boards. We decided that when we're promoting nuclear energy, we can't have the same body that promotes nuclear energy being the ones that investigate a meltdown. It just doesn't make sense. Same thing with plane crashes. So we want vaccine safety taken out of Health and Human Services and establishes its own firewalled regulatory agency. Also, we want, very simply, people say, well, vaccines are safe. There's no way to prove they're safe. You're doing no placebo-based studies. I mean, listen to me, none, zero are being done. So there's no safety being established in any of these 72 vaccines that you're being given over the course of your first 18 years of life. It's a giant guessing game, and it's dangerous. We know we're seeing injuries. As I said, we could be having 5.9 million injuries every year. Well, one thing that should be happening to determine what injuries are being caused or, are vaccines actually making us safer would be the simplest study known to man, and that's a vaxxed versus unvaxxed study. I say whether you believe in vaccines or you're skeptical of vaccines, we should all want to know what is the safety of and what is the health progress of people that get vaccinated versus those that don't. So there's a database inside of the CDC called the Vaccine Safety Data Link. It has 10 million people in it. And all we're requesting is that a graph be put up and that all the vaccinated children be put on this graph and all the unvaccinated children be put on the graph so that we can ask questions like, what is the rate of autism? Is it 1 in 68 children when you're unvaccinated? Because that's where the vaccinated population at. What about asthma, ADD, ADHD, multiple sclerosis, childhood leukemias? All of these things are on a massive rise. We've gone from 11% autoimmune and neurological disorders back in 1980s, and now we are at 54% of America's children have an autoimmune and neurological disorder. And when you watch that increase, it goes right along with right when we passed the 86 Compensation Act, we took away liability, and all of a sudden the vaccine industry exploded. We went from 5 to 10 vaccines for our children to now 72, as I said. And you watch that increase and you watch this massive increase in our childhood illness. This is the sickest nation of children in the industrialized world, and it's the sickest generation of children this country has ever seen. I worked on the daytime talk show The Doctors for 6 years. I won an Emmy Award there, and we would often say that this is the first generation of children that is not expected to live as long as their own parents. So we want a vax versus unvax study to get down to the base of what is happening here. Are you actually safer if you're being vaccinated? There was a study like that done very recently, actually came out in 2017, of homeschoolers, and it looked at children. And what they found was vaccinated children did have lower rates of measles and chicken pox and, infectious diseases like that. But they had higher rates, 4 times the amount of autism, 30 times the amount of allergic rhinitis, 4 times the amount of neurological disorders, ADD, ADHD over 4 to 5 times higher in vaccinated children. And so what we're seeing is you may be protecting against what was once a trivial childhood illness like measles, which was a Brady Bunch episode in the 1960s. We all giggled because the whole family got the disease and they got to stay home from school. But now they've turned it into the Black Plague. They've made everybody terrified. It's not true. The death rate was minimal before a vaccine ever arrived. And the question we have to ask is, have we replaced measles with autism, neurological disorders, autoimmune disorders like multiple sclerosis? Is this ADD, ADHD crisis, children that can't sit still or learn anymore, learning deficits, depression in kids? All of this, we're seeing it in our kids. It's everywhere. Our children are gravely ill, and I think that the vaccine program is one of the major culprits in it. And our Health and Human Services is looking the other way. They're not doing any of the studies that would show us if our speculation is true, that this is being caused by vaccines.
I think, when we look at the fact that they've been given legal immunity, that the Health and Human Services are the ones that you have to sue. The same people that are supposed to be doing the oversight are the ones that are actually protecting the industry. When they get legal immunity to this, that ought to raise red flags with everybody. And as you pointed out, many of us have said, look at the radical increase in autism. It was absolutely unheard of 20, 25 years ago. And now everybody knows about it. Everybody has a friend, or usually now a family member. I mean, it's an epidemic that's going on. And it's not just the homeschooling community that you point out. We also see this with the Amish. You look at some communities where people don't get the vaccines or don't use it in the schedule that they demand from people. But the key thing, and I want to talk about this when we come back, is the effort to mandate this, to take away our choice. And again, we're talking to Del Bigtree. You can find this information at icandecide.com. Stay with us. We'll be right back. I'm David Knight. Welcome back. I'm David Knight, and the vaccine manufacturers do have a place to run to. They can run to the HHS. HHS will hide the negative effects of vaccines. They will give them legal immunity. They have a kangaroo court where you can't get discovery. You don't have a real legal process. You have to sue the people who are supposed to be overseeing the vaccine industry. And you have to sue the people who are collecting the data. We don't know if they're collecting the data appropriately or not. As our guest Del Bigtree pointed out, they even admit that since this is a voluntary system, they only have about 1% of the total number of vaccine injuries that they've even collected data on. And that should be concerning to you right there, because that 1% is 59,000 injuries and 432 deaths. So as Del was saying, well, let's extrapolate that out. What if they reported 100% at that rate? Because that's just a random sampling. Take that out by 100. You got 5.9 million vaccine injuries, 43,000 deaths. We get upset, and rightfully so, when the government withholds information from us about something like the JFK assassination. We don't like to be lied to. We don't like to be deceived. We don't like to have things hidden from us. And yet, they are assassinating our children by keeping this information secret. And so Del Bigtree produced the documentary Vaxxed, which they tried to suppress. Now he is in the process with his nonprofit. It's Informed Consent Action Network. Their website is icandecide.com. And I want Del to tell us now what the process is for getting this fixed and how you can help. Because many of you are informed. If you weren't informed before this program, now you know enough that you should be very angry. You should be demanding more information from the government on things that directly affect you. directly affect you. I mean, if you're going to be upset about government cover-ups, this is the government cover-up to be upset about of all, because this is the one that is going to kill your children, kill your grandchildren at an early age. Del, tell us a little bit about this process, because the 1986 Act allows Congress to step in if and protect the public if the bureaucracy is not doing anything. They typically abdicate all their authority and everything, these bureaucracies, and they run wild, and then they come in like a white knight to do something about it. Well, now's the time for them to come in and do something about it, isn't it?
Well, we're telling people, go to our website, ICanDecide.com, and print out this HHS notice and deliver it to your legislators. Let them know that the HHS is on notice. People have to recognize our freedoms are being robbed from us. We are being force injected here in California, where I live, because of a law called SB 277. Our children can no longer go to school unless they get 72 vaccines. That's public or private school. The pharmaceutical industry is the most powerful lobby in Washington now. They're outspending oil and gas 2 to 1. Twice as much money is going from pharma into our politicians, buying our presidents, buying our senators, buying our congresspeople. And you got to ask yourself, what do you think they're doing there? You know, the people will think it's just about drugs. It's really about vaccines. This is a product, as you said, has no liability. It can be forced through laws. We are passing laws and writing laws all across this nation to force you into these products. And it's not just about kids. I want to warn people, on Health and Human Services website, they have something called Healthy People 2020, and that is a mandated vaccine program for all adults. The kids are just the beginning. In the end, they want 320 million mandated customers, and there's 270 vaccines in the pipeline. There's thousands of vaccines trials going on right now. This is the future of a billion-dollar industry that's about to turn into a trillion-dollar industry. When you follow the money, you realize that this is buying our politicians. You need to look into the background of your politicians. You need to let your politicians know this HHS notice exists. I stand for it. We want vaccine safety science made private, taken out of the CDC, out of HHS. And we want a vax versus unvax study, and we want accountability, and we want liability back on the industry. Let the natural cycle of commerce decide the safety of a product. Force this industry to do the safety studies, or we can sue them. It is a perfect storm when you take away lawsuits, when you mandate a product and people do not have choices. Every single stopgap that is supposed to make something safe, like car airbags or car seats or cribs, all of that has been taken away for vaccines. This is a dangerous, dangerous product, and no one is regulating it. And our children are being, as you pointed out, murdered, maimed, and destroyed. We may be on the verge of destroying a generation with this vaccine program. I'm not messing around. Right. This is a serious, serious issue. And
you're talking about California and SB 277. And, of course, one of the key spokesmen and advocates for that was a guy named Dr. Pan. He's a senator there. And he was one of the guys, interestingly enough, who was also leading the effort to decriminalize the intentional spreading of disease, the intentional spreading of HIV and AIDS, which can kill people. So at the same time, he's saying, we're going to mandate that you take these vaccines for which there is no liability to the companies that produce them, and you can get no information about the risks involved. At the same time, we're going to take away any liability from somebody who intentionally spreads a life-threatening disease. How do you reconcile that? Clearly, you understand that this is a guy who is in the pocket of the vaccine industry. He doesn't have people's health in mind when he's going to decriminalize the spreading of HIV and criminalize not getting a vaccine.
Well, look at this. I mean, what he just said is, we don't care if you spread AIDS to people. That's fine. I mean, that used to be illegal. It used to be a death sentence. But guess what? Now we have a vaccine for it. If you decriminalize it, everybody starts sleeping with each other, giving each other AIDS. But don't worry about it. We have a vaccine that we can sell and make even more money on. This entire thing is a conveyor belt we're being put on. We're being injured by vaccines. Then there's drugs to fix those injuries. And every disease out there that we have a vaccine for will make you terrified of it. You'll get those vaccines. But think about the fact that there's millions of other diseases, bacteria, microbes, everything that we could be worried about. We don't hear about them because there's not a vaccine available yet. This entire thing is just whatever we can make a vaccine and make money off of, we're going to make you terrified of that disease. We're going to take scary diseases like AIDS and decriminalize them so that you have to worry that you can get it and there's nothing you can do about it, so you better get a vaccine. This whole system is so corrupt and it's destroying our health. I just read an article that this is the first, we're now seeing a decline in the mortality in the health rate of our senior citizens, dying earlier, sicker earlier, and that was what we touted as the great medical system. We have more babies dying on the first day of life in the United States of America than every other industrialized nation combined. We have more mothers, pregnant mothers, dying than every other industrialized nation combined. How do we trust the medical system where we can't keep babies alive and we can't keep mothers alive? Something has gone wrong. One of it is forced vaccines in mothers and babies.
You're talking about babies. I had a lady who had an organization, Nurses Against Mandatory Vaccines, on, and she was saying, hey, when we're in the preemie place, when they bring in the babies that were born prematurely, and we know that their immune system is not developed, but they're going to vaccinate them on schedule based on the number of days since their birth, even though they weren't developed. And they said they bring in the people because we know that they're going to go into all kinds of arrests and other issues. We're going to have to put them in intensive care because of the reactions, but they're going to do it anyway. And she said they were talking about that there. But, when you're talking about other diseases and antibiotics, it was just a couple of years ago. Remember that the drug companies came out and said, well, we're going to stop doing any antibiotic research. We've got a lot of antibiotics that we put out there, and they've developed immunities to this. So we're not even going to do any research or try to come up with anything that'll kill bacteria. We're just going to focus now on vaccines. And if people understood the economics behind that, the reality is that they're doing that because if they did antibiotics, they would have to put information about how effective and how safe they were. But if they do it with vaccines, they don't have any of that concern. They can just make money off of this.
Absolutely. Look at the commercials. And this is something I try to point out. All of our media has been co-opted by the pharmaceutical industry.
Yes.
So 75% of the salaries there, like Sanjay Gupta, Anderson Cooper, Rachel Maddow, you name it, even Fox News executives, that money's coming from a huge financial input from the pharmaceutical industry. So how do we get the truth out? And what is it they're pumping? And if you look at every ad in the commercial break, you'll see these drugs with these ridiculous ticker tapes of side effects. You giggle to yourself and you think, who would buy that? But you've got to stop giggling because that is taking away free media. That's why InfoWars and things like this are so important that aren't owned by this pharmaceutical industry. But one of the dangerous things is when we look at those ads and you see those side effects, notice with the HPV ad, notice with vaccine ads now, they don't have to tell you about the side effects. You don't get that ticker tape. It's not that they don't exist. They've made separate rules and laws for vaccines, just like they don't safety test them the same way. They also don't have to worry about advertising the same way. This is a total and complete brainwashed, it's corrupted system, and it is incredibly dangerous. And our children are sitting, at the end of a barrel of this revolver that we're spinning and just firing danger bullets into our children.
They've been given financial immunity, legal immunity, and they have redacted all information so that you could know what the risks are. And as you pointed out, people are exchanging childhood diseases that weren't serious, like measles, now for autism, but we don't know what the risks are. You can get the information at ICanDecide.com. You can find him at Del Bigtree on Twitter. Thank you so much, Mr. Bigtree. Very, very important to help him in this effort.
In ancient times, man roamed the earth in a constant state of hunting or being hunted. Introducing Caveman, where cutting-edge science meets ancient super nutrients. Secure your bottle right now at InfoWarsStore.com.